Like Steve said, we have a lot going on, which, it's daunting, but it's also encouraging because we know this is when the Lord works. The Lord is with us in these hard times. You go back and you look through the Bible. I remember I was talking to a buddy of mine once and really agonizing over some things and doing the what about this and why not that. And he said to me, the thing is, Jay, he goes, I look back, he goes, and I read the Bible, I don't hear a lot of stories like the one you want it to be, but there's a whole lot of stories just like the one you got. And it's true. God is with us in the hardship. He is with us in the trial. He is with us in the struggle. In America, they've kind of painted a picture that once you know the Lord and you're with Him, that, it's all sunshine and roses and there's no problems. No, it's quite the opposite. I would say you go through a lot more knowing the Lord, but having the confidence that there is the Lord and He's with us is what makes it different. So we're going to get back into my lessons. For those who haven't been here, I've been going through Corinthians. I went through 1 Corinthians, and now we're into 2 Corinthians. And of course, these are letters from Paul to the Corinthian church. And basically, during this time in the Bible, he's establishing the church. Jesus had come, and up to that point, you had the synagogue and the Jewish traditions, and then, you had, outside of that, you had all these pagan religions. You had the Greek gods, you had temples all over, and so now you have the real, true church that Jesus is establishing, and it's really something different because it's about the people. It's about the people having a relationship with God. And Paul, of course, once you get people involved, now there's all kinds of questions. And they want to know this and they want to know that. And Paul's trying to tell them. And he's working through a lot of things. But there's establishing that early church and kind of how things should be. And when I preach, what I look at is I've gone through the Bible. What God has kind of shown me is, okay, the history of it's incredible. There's all these wonderful examples and lessons. But it's like, what is happening now? What does God want to show us now? And, again, we have so many big churches and crazy things going on, and, I'm sure there's wonderful things happening in all these places, but I look at the foundation of the first century church, and I remember Jerry talking about it a lot. We want to be as much like that first century church as we can be. I didn't understand that as much then, but now I do. And that's really what this is about. So Paul get these letters, and I remember once I saw a Christian podcaster, he said, when he debates with people about the Bible, when people question him, when there's things, he says the thing they have to remember, these are letters, doctrines that were written, and they weren't written to us. So we have to remember that there's a context to them, but they were written for us because God had them written in a context that would still be moving and touching to us. So that's where we're at. And one of the big takeaways is in the church, the church is getting made up. Jesus had come. The apostles are trying to set it up. Paul is saying, hey, this is the deal. And it's to use these things to fulfill Paul's teachings so that the church would be a blessing to others and to glorify God. That's really what Paul was trying to do. Let's get close to God and love one another. That's what it all comes down to. And as I've gone through this series, the one thing God keeps bringing me to is Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. And it says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And I love that. God took me to that, and it just really sums up what the church is supposed to be. We want to fight to be close to God, and then we want to encourage one another for that same purpose. And more so, the closer we're getting to the time, whether it's our time or the whole world's time, that's our goal. And I love that because, Paul is giving these warnings and he's giving these teachings. And in the course of it, where we're at is he's dealing with false teachers. And so as he's gone through, it's come about the point that, hey, the Corinthians have taken on some people who are starting to undermine what Christ wanted done. And we're going to go back and review and roll into what's going on now. So let's start in 2 Corinthians 11, verses 1 through 6. I hope you'll put up with a little of my foolishness, but you are already doing that. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promise you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present to you as a pure virgin to him. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. But I do not think I am in the least inferior to those super apostles. I may not be a trained speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. So Paul is, he's got the intentions of purifying the church. And he's letting them know, this is what I want. What I'm trying to do is lead you to God as purely as you can be. And he's pointing out that they've been vulnerable, that already within this time, they're accepting teachings other than what Christ presented. So right here, right in the beginning, you've already have this going on. And then we're going to pick up in 2 Corinthians 11, 10 through 12. As surely as the truth of Christ is in me, nobody in the regions of Achaia will stop this boasting of mine. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And I will keep on doing what I am doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. So, Paul now is, again, explaining, I'm not going to stop boasting about this because this is my goal, to bring you to this point. But he also has every intention of undercutting these people who are trying to be equal with him. And I'm sure in the world, and I've heard this, that, Paul, he wanted his way, and then he's got these other competitors, and they want their way. No, Paul wants the truth to be represented, and he wants it to be solidified. And he knows that anybody who comes with anything else is a false prophet, and they're undermining what God wants. And that's the problem. Paul has a responsibility to call these people out. And you can see it then. He sees people coming in, and the church is already starting to be directed by these false teachings. So he calls that out. And I thought about that today as how that's not really a popular or even considered an appropriate thing anymore to call people out on these kind of things. We're in a time where tolerance is what is considered the most important characteristic between people. Like, okay, we all have to put up with one another. We have to tolerate one another. And of course, there's an aspect of that that's true. We want to love one another. But that doesn't mean accepting people's wrong decisions. Accepting the things that are leading them where they don't need to be. Paul called it out right away because he knew you have to cut this off at the root or it's going to grow. And he goes on in verses 13 through 15. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising, then, if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. I had gone over this before, and the things that stuck out to me was it says they're deceitful workmen. These aren't just lazy people wandering around kind of, taking these are workmen. They are actively in the church doing this, and they're masquerading as apostles of Christ. These aren't false religions. These aren't even other. They're masquerading as apostles of Christ, and it's difficult to be in that position. When you see people that say they love the Lord, you don't want to straight up call them out, but we have to be aware of what people are doing and what doesn't line up with the Word of God. And it spoke to me too that during this time, this is the first century of the church, and you had all this other stuff going on, so they were vulnerable. And one thing I've said is, Satan, he's so cunning. He, just like God is so faithful and he meets us where we're at, he understands us and blesses us where we're at. Satan is the polar opposite. He understands where we're at and he knows how to attack where we're at. I've got there's different examples I could give, but they could be completely opposite, and Satan will undermine one person who had a completely different set of circumstances by meeting them in a different way than he does this person. But he knows what he's doing. That first church, you had, okay, things are just starting up. This is new teaching. It's new to what people are hearing, and it made them vulnerable in ways that new men came in and tried to take advantage of that. You had people mixing the old teaching with the new. You had all that going on. And then, but even today, it's the opposite. Now we've had thousands of years of the truth being exposed in the planet, and now Satan uses that, because now there's offshoot after offshoot, and there's different doctrines, and there's all of these things. So there was a specific vulnerability then to false teaching, but there's a specific vulnerability now. And what God showed me is like that was the beginning of the church, and I don't know how close we are to the end, but we're a lot closer than we used to be. And we're still vulnerable. And this isn't just Paul undercutting the competition. Again, this isn't just him saying, hey, these guys are bad and I'm good, you need to listen to me. Let's face it, we see that all the time now. That's another thing Satan uses. He's made the world think, well, who do you believe? How do you know who's right and who's wrong? This person says this, and depending on where you were born, you're going to believe that, or depending on who your family is, you're going to believe this. He's not saying it because he's trying to, present himself and get the things he wants. It's not elevating him. It elevates his message, but he's pointing out that you have to undermine the people that are doing it wrong. And he's affirming what Jesus taught. Let's go back to Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20. And this is Jesus speaking. He says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn brushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, and a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them." Watch what people do. We need to see how they act. It's easy to talk, especially when you have a position where you can get up and say things and people only hear what you say and then they don't see what you do day to day. It's easy to look good. It's easy to say the right things. It's easy to present an image that makes it believable that you're doing right. But watch what is a person's fruit? How do they walk through their lives? What do they do day to day? You look at that, and that's how you see if someone's a false prophet or not. It's going to be the fruit that's presented. Steve preached on James last week, and I think that comes a lot to it. In James, there's always the argument back and forth: are people saved by faith or works? And James is saying, look, here's the deal. If you have faith, there should be some works. And that plays into this. Look, we're not saved by the works we do. It's not a matter of we're trying to work our way to, but the life you live and the fruit that comes out of it is going to be a presentation of what you believe and what you're trying to do. And that's how you tell if someone's a false prophet or if they're trying to follow the Lord. And Jesus goes on, verses 21 through 23. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" That verse used to scare me, and I thought of it as harsh because I was always one of those guys who was worried, like, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not doing it right? I know when I went in the academy, I was determined, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm here. There was a class of 50 people or whatever it was, 40-something. And I remember, I'm like, I'm all in. This is good. And they sat us down, and they're like, okay, here's the deal. 10 of you won't be here when this is over. And I immediately was like, is that me? As sure as I was that this is what I wanted to do, I worried that it was me. And I thought to myself, no, this isn't me. But then I thought, I'm sure everybody in this room is thinking, that's not me. It's got to be somebody or it wouldn't happen, right? I used to worry the same thing. When Jesus said this, I would think, oh man, what if these are people that thought they were doing it right. These are people who were trying and meant well, and then Jesus says, you blew it. That's not what's going on here. These are people that flat out abused Jesus' name. They didn't have a heart from it. He didn't know them. They didn't know him. They just used his name as that stamp of approval I've talked about to go out and say what they wanted so that people would accept their messages and really give them honor, riches, whatever it was that they got out of it, that's what they were doing. These aren't people that knew the Lord. And now we're going to go back, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 1 through 6. Sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of bouncing around. This is Paul still writing to the church. I must go on boasting, although there is nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. Apostles and people that are sincere about following the Lord are not going to brag about themselves. Not that we don't make mistakes. Sometimes we brag and we make mistakes. But you can see in a person's heart, if they are trying to uplift themselves and elevate an image about themselves and elevate what people think about them, then their heart is not sincere for the Lord. Apostles like Paul here, Paul's saying, look, I've got things I could talk about, and that's fine. That's earthly things, whatever. But what I'm going to brag about is the things God has done, the things I see God doing, the things that God does in my life, the thing I see in other life. That is what they're going to do. People, true apostles, true followers of Christ, want people to know Christ. I know I run my mouth and I like to do things and make, show off and whatever else. And that's whatever. It can be silly, it can be stupid, it can be funny, whatever. But certainly as a Christian, and as I've gotten into the position of preaching, I realize all of that is just silly stuff. None of it matters. All that matters is if people know the Lord and get closer to him. A true apostle is going to lift up the Lord. And you look out in the world now, you see a lot of these quite frankly, they're pastors of huge churches, huge ministries. We can see them now more than we used to because of media and social media. And you have just bragging and this very self-gratuitous attitude that they're so wonderful because God made them so wonderful. I have some specific examples. Sorry, I get hung up thinking about it because part of me wants to just call people out and start saying who they are. But that's not the point. But there are people that brag about the houses they have, the money they have, the clothes they're wearing. And I think anybody here, this crowd, would feel the same as me. Like, okay, nobody's really going to listen to that. A Christian's not going to take this seriously. But they've got congregations, sometimes thousands of people, and they've got ministries on the internet, hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are encouraged by them, and you hear those people amening and preach it and all those kind of things. So they're buying into that, I guess, with the idea that, hey, if they hope to elevate themselves to that at some point. But there are preachers that are doing that. That's not honoring God at all. But they're out there. And in fact, they're the people that are out there that are having a huge impact on the world. Not a positive impact, but a negative impact. And Paul is saying, look, we got to do something different here. We have to see something different. And he goes on, verse 7 through 10, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Apostles recognize and promote their own personal weaknesses. They're proud of them because they realize that shows more and more the glory of God. Human beings in general, we want to look at people and see things that we're impressed with. And it's just human nature that we'll look out and we'll see a man or a woman and we'll be impressed with what they're doing and how they're doing it, and we give them too much credit, to be honest. Any gift anybody has or ever had, any ability to do anything, even just the possibility of taking a breath every day comes from Christ, comes from God. We couldn't do a thing without him. And Paul here is really expressing that in a beautiful way. I used to be terrified of this verse because I thought if it meant the closer I got to the Lord, that all the things I hated about myself that I really wanted to get rid of, that he was just going to really stick to me because it would be better, it would glorify him. But the truth is, as you grow in the Lord, you realize these weaknesses become something completely different to you, because you do recognize that when you feel weak and you feel your own ability slipping, when you feel your own, the things that you consider in your control slipping out of your control, then you really recognize that God is handling everything and that you can't handle any of it. He gives us assignments, he gives us responsibilities, but the beauty is in our weakness, we see, oh, this was God all along. And when you feel that, when you've had that happen, you just want people to know it so badly because it's so beautiful. When you feel that closeness with the Lord, it's almost like going back and being a small child again and being able to be held in your parents' arms and understanding that, like, you're completely taken care of. The Lord is doing that for us, and our weakness shows that. And in this preaching, Paul is saying, look, I'm prouder of my weaknesses because that shows that anything that happens in my life that's good is God is doing it. And in reference to this with these false prophets, again, you won't see that from people who are going out and are trying to do this for their own personal gain. Again, I could set off and mention the examples, but you won't see them preaching their weaknesses. You might preach them talking about some struggles or things that go on in their life, but they always do it with a way that ends up honoring them. They do it, they say that, well, God did this and this is what happened, but it honors them. It doesn't ever really represent that God did all of it. A false prophet cannot speak the truth in that way because what's going to happen is then they're going to lose the ground that they're trying to gain. It's like a politician who's lying. Sometimes it's embarrassing to me to see politicians on either side. A politician by nature, when you have people go up and they have a question that's asked and they speak it, and we absolutely all know that this is bunk, but they have to do it. I've been in the position of seeing it with defense attorneys. They get paid to do a certain thing, and I'm not saying there are defense attorneys that have done things, and I have legitimate cases where there are legitimate questions and people work with you, but there's a lot where they say what they have to say because they're not concerned with what's going on now. They're looking with what they're getting out of it. And we need to recognize these men. And Paul is saying, look, here's the deal. These people are out there. And what I'm saying is, as much as I hate preaching this is what Paul's saying, and it's still happening now, and I would say we're even more vulnerable to it now than we've ever been. Because our kids, our grandkids, the people we love, they're being influenced constantly. There's a constant stream of ideas, and moralities, false moralities, immorality being funneled to them constantly. Satan has more means to touch people with false teaching than he's ever had. And we have to be aware of that, and we have to step up and represent Christ so that they can see that difference and that Satan can't have them. It's a scary time. I consider it a very scary time in the world. But this is happening, and we have to be aware of it, or we're going to lose a lot of people. There's just too much worldly influence out there. If we don't step up as Christians and show them the difference and show them the true God, they will follow these false gods. Okay. So that's where we pick up now. We're looking at 2 Corinthians 12, 11 through 13. And Paul goes on. I've made a fool of myself, but you drove me to it. I ought to have been commended by you, for I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles, even though I am nothing. The thing that marks an apostle, signs, wonders, and miracles were done among you with great perseverance. How were you inferior to the other churches, except that I was never a burden to you? Forgive me this wrong. So a couple of things there. What I like is, Paul is saying, look, it shouldn't be this way. The things I told you, you should recognize that I'm speaking the truth to you. And you should have commended me for it. He's not raising himself up, but he's saying, look, your perspective on things is off because you're not seeing that I'm representing the truth. And then I love this, what he says. He goes, for I am not the least inferior to these super apostles. And that used to kind of rub me wrong because I'm like, is he bragging? It's kind of, I used to think Paul could be a little full of himself. That's how I used to look at things. But you start seeing, no, he's contrasting the behavior so you can see what somebody should be doing and what they are and what actual people are doing. And I love this. He says, I am not the least inferior to these super apostles, even though I am nothing. So he's saying he's nothing and they're less than that. And he's right. And then as he goes on, he says, look, we did all the things. You know that we're sincere. He's basically confirming we're legit. I was legitimate. You saw what we did. You know it. I shouldn't have to explain that, but it did. And again, he's not bragging on himself. He's doing it because he's trying to set that foundation, and it's the foundation that we have to set as a church so that the people, our kids, the people that come into the church, so they can see, hey, there's a difference. This is what is supposed to be done. These are the people that are following the Lord, and you can tell because this is what they're doing. And in that, it doesn't elevate us. It shouldn't honor us, but what it should do is set an example so you can see when people aren't doing that. And Paul goes on, verses 14 through 18. Now I am ready to visit you the third time, and I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. So I will very gladly spend for you everything I have and expend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? Be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you. Yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. Did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? I urged Titus to go to you, and I sent our brother with him. Titus did not exploit you, did he? Did we not act in the same spirit and follow the same course? This is the example we need to be to the people that God brings into our lives. We are the church, and we're the ones going out and saying, hey, look, there's a God in heaven. Christ is his son. You need to know him. And we have to set an example. The way we live matters. The things we do, the things, Paul he's an apostle. He's representing everybody. But it's the trickle-down effect. We have that same responsibility in this world. We are supposed to touch people the same way Paul touched this church. We are the example. We are the people that God uses to show people the truth. And as you break this down, I love it. You go back verses 14 and 15. Now I'm ready to visit you a third time, and I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. To me, I hear that, and it's beautiful because I look at, again, you look at people I could call out now, these apostles, these people nowadays that are super apostles, what Paul would have called it, these mega churches, and you see the money, the things they have. I've seen literal examples of the churches running where people they demand their congregation bring in their tax returns because they want to see if those people are sincere in their giving. This is part of their church service. And people are getting on board with that because they think this is, that the pastor is leading them toward the tithing and thing they're supposed to do. And Paul is saying, look, I'm not going to be a burden to you because I don't want your possessions, but you. All he cares about is for those people to get close to the Lord, and that's all we should care about. Whatever that means for us. We need people to get close to the Lord, and that's all we should care about. And then he gives the example. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. I got a million jokes on that one. I'm not going to get into any of them. We know life is rough. And, we do what we can. But Paul is saying, it's like, we love our kids, and it's nice when they do things for us, but we don't really. What we really want is just to have them around. I don't want my kids to give me things. I don't need that. I just want them there. When they give me things, I'm not worried about it. I mean, that's nice, but I just want them there. And you almost feel guilty. And it's oddly enough, I'm going to reference a TV show. I was watching Seinfeld yesterday. It happened to be on. And, they had the parents. And they have such a funny thing with the parents. So Jerry goes and visits his parents. And he comes out, it's the dad's birthday, and he gives him a present. He's like, oh, what are you doing? I should be buying you presents. And Jerry says, I don't know what that means. And I thought it's so true. But that, as parents, we know what that means. When our kids do anything for us, it's like, just having them there is enough. And Paul is saying that's what it's like. Look, I'm not looking to come to the church and have them do things for me, give me things. He goes, he's there because he wants these people to know the Lord and to get closer to the Lord. And that should be our goal too. In verses 16 through 18, he says, so I very gladly spend for you everything I have and spend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? Be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you. Yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. So he's saying, look, he'll gladly give up everything. He just wants people to know the Lord. And that's what we need to be. That's what this world is looking for. That's who we need to be. Again, when I started preaching, the thing that I felt God was trying to show me was, look, sometimes things get so big, we have so many messages, we're so removed, we're thousands of years, that we forget. These are people, we're people, God's got this message. We are the church. And it's that simple. This is who we need to be. Paul was willing to he'd give up everything. He doesn't care. None of his stuff matters. It's just he wants people to know the Lord. And that's who we need to be as well. And then he goes on, he makes a point, did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? I urged Titus to go to you, and I sent a brother with him. Did Titus exploit you? No. And all that's cool. He's kind of saying, look around. I'm telling the truth. Did any of the guys that come try to take advantage of you? Did they abuse you anyway? Did they, any of that? But what I love is at the end he says, did we not act in the same spirit and follow the same course? And that's what we really need to look at, is that the people we're with, are they following the same spirit? We all know, like Jesus said, we recognize the spirit when we see it. Did these people, anybody that shows up, somebody who shows up here and starts saying something, anybody who has the opportunity to teach, anybody who has an opportunity in our lives to tell us anything, what spirit do they have? And what course are they following? We need to make sure that it's on track. And if I get up here and you see me running off at the mouth or saying things I shouldn't, then I need to be called on that. Because it's the spirit that we need to be following. And as Jesus said, and Paul mentioned earlier, you recognize these people by their fruit. And I don't even want to think that we have to go around looking and seeing what people are doing, that we have to even have that kind of attitude, but we do. Because they are out there. And we can be vulnerable to them. So we have to be aware of it, and we have to be diligent. And Paul goes on. Again, this is his example to us. 19 through 21. Have you been thinking all along that we've been defending ourselves to you? We have been speaking in the sight of God as those in Christ. And everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. For I am afraid that when I come, I may not find you as I want you to be, and that you may not find me as you want me to be. I fear that there may be quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, faction, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. I'm afraid that when I come again, God will humble me before you, and I will be grieved over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual sin, and debauchery in which they have indulged. Now, I think he's talking to the church. Surely none of this can be happening, right? No, this is what happens. These are the things that people do. It's been going on since before Christ. It was going on right after Christ. It's still going on now. We are people, and as people, we're also sinners. And we need to meet that head on and deal with it. And Paul goes in, and I love the way he breaks it down. So here we go. Verse 19. Have you been thinking all along that we've been defending ourselves to you? Again, as I read this, that's what I always used to think. Like, man, I'd worry about verses like how they're going to come across to people. Is it going to sound like Paul's just running his mouth and he's kind of, no, he's not just defending them. He's setting a standard. He's showing them the truth. This is how people need to be acting. And you can see we did this and what the result was. That way, people who don't understand or are learning or are more immature spiritually can see that difference and they can recognize someone who's not behaving that way. We have been speaking in the sight of God as those in Christ, and everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. That's what it all comes down to. In the sight of God. I had a conversation the other day. It's so, when you come across people and they know you're a Christian, and you see them out in the workplace or whatever else, and you notice that you speak a little holier to them. You don't say things you may say with other people that you don't think know the Lord. It's like, because it kind of, with this, I love it, in the sight of God. Of course, we're always in the sight of God, but we don't always feel like we're in the sight of God. And I'm ashamed to admit it, but I confess that when I am somewhere and feel like I'm out of the sight of God, guess what? I can be a moron. I can do all kinds of things wrong, say all kinds of things, set a terrible example. And we usually do it thinking, again, it's outside the sight of God. This isn't affecting my walk or their walk, because this is unrelated, But guess what? Then that person shows up at church, or they say, oh, you preach, or whatever, and now guess what? What has that done to the possibility of my example to them? Paul's saying, look, in the sight of God, we should do everything as if we're in the sight of God, because when we do that, we're going to behave. And that's going to be a good example to the people that we're talking with. And everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. That's what we should also be doing. We shouldn't be looking to tear people down. We shouldn't be looking to undermine people. Everything we should be doing as Christians is to strengthen each other. And it can be hard because a lot of times when there's conflicts and we have disagreements, sometimes a person, and I've been in this position, when I've been counseled, when people had to struggle with me, a lot of times I didn't consider that they were doing it to strengthen me. Because unfortunately, you don't really realize that till after, if you're fortunate enough to get to the other side. You don't realize that you're being strengthened until you've been strengthened. Until then, it just feels like these other people are morons. They're wrong. But that's not it. They are strengthening. People have put that investment into our lives. And Paul, starting with Jesus, he came. He's the ultimate example. Boom. Everything he did, all of these things, even the conflicts and to show us was to strengthen us. And then the people, the apostles, and on and on and on. There's that beautiful song from back in the day that talked about, basically you get to the impact that people had in your lives and what your life would be without them. We've had this all through our lives to bring us to where we're at. And we're blessed to be in the position where we can be that for other people too. And that's what we need to be striving for. This little church, that's what we need to be striving for, to touch people, to live in the sight of God, and to touch people, to strengthen them. And people can tell that you love them. Even when they think you're wrong, they can tell. And that brings them to a new position in their own lives. And then Paul gets down to the nitty-gritty. Verse 20, he says, "For I'm afraid that when I come, I may not find you as I want you to be, and you may not find me as you want me to be. I fear that there may be quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, faction, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder." The truth is, Paul, when you're in a position in anybody's life, whether it's as a parent, a spiritual authority, if you have a sincere heart for God, don't you hate when people fall into sin and you have to confront them on that? I mean, it's agonizing. First of all, we hate to see people into positions they shouldn't be in. But I hate to go to someone and know that I'm going to upset them or hurt their feelings or I hate all of that. But it needs to be done. And Paul's saying, look, if I show up and this is the way it is, unfortunately, you're going to be mad at me. I'm going to be mad at you. We're going to have some stuff to work through. And I love that Paul is so realistic about it because, he's been through it, obviously, and he knows. And here we are, so we shouldn't expect that we're going to get away from that. We're going to have times in our lives where we fall and people need to beat us back into where we need to be. And on the back end of it, we'll be glad that they did. The harder part of that is at times we need to step up and meet people where they're at, even if that's uncomfortable for us or discouraging for us. We have to step up and stand in the gap for people, even if it's going to make them mad at us, because they're going to need that. And God can use us to get them through to the other side. And then in closing, Paul sums it up here. He says, I love it in verse 21. "I'm afraid that when I come again, God will humble me before you, and I will be grieved over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual sin, and debauchery in which they have indulged." So Paul's saying he's going to be humbled because he's going to have to confront them. He's going to have to deal with this. It's going to have to be a hard thing for him. But what does he say? He will be grieved. He doesn't find any joy in that. It doesn't it doesn't make him look any better. It doesn't make him feel good that he's right and they're wrong. He'll be grieved. And that's how we should feel. When we go to people and when we have to confront them, if there's changes that need to be made in their life, we should be grieved over that. It should hurt. It should break our hearts to see people in sin, and it should always be out of love. Paul's not condemning them. He's not criticizing them as people. He's saying that sin has to be met and it has to be overcome. But it breaks his heart to do it. And then what I love is here because he says, over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented. We're all sinners. We all do things. The question is, have you repented? Have we repented? And that's really what the Christian walk is all about. Because none of us are ever going to make it. I don't want to go through a list of sins I committed this morning already, and I'm sure I'll fall. I know myself that I'm going to sin. But we need to constantly be turning back to God. And that's the beauty of the relationship. And so Paul understands, look, what you did before, it doesn't matter. What you did 5 minutes ago, it doesn't matter. What you did a week, it doesn't matter. If you've repented, if you have gone to God and acknowledged that it was wrong and committed to change, that's where we need to be. It's not to berate people, knock them down. You did this, you did that. It's not to put people in. It's because, look, get us back in the game. You're getting back in the game. It's like an athlete. You see an athlete who's out and they're doing stuff. They start to get frazzled or something's going on. And sometimes he's like, okay, hey, you're pulling them out of the game because their head's not straight. They're not where they need. They're not functioning. This is no good. Doesn't mean you just cut them and it's over. You get their head on straight. They're ready and they get back in the game. God has given us this great gift. First, we're forgiven. We can have that peace of knowing we're forgiven. But he's given us great gift that if we repent, if we just recognize and confess, oh man, I see this was wrong. God, I'm sorry, this was wrong. He just wants us to know it and then to commit. Yeah, I really see that that's wrong, and I'm committing to go the other way from that. That's a great gift. Think where our lives would be if we did not have that from God. And so as it wraps up, this is what Paul's doing. Again, he's pointing out these false apostles. He's saying where we need to see, and he's setting the example of what we should be. And that's kind of what I hold on to. As we go forward, okay, what can we get out of these teachings? And it's like, we're this little church, right? And that's what God's mission. We're this little church. We're going out in the world. We're trying to do the best we can. We want to touch people. This is what we need to do. These things that Paul did, the examples that he set, the things that he encouraged, this is what we need to do. And they'll be as effective today as they were for Paul then. And because our end goal is, again, let's go back to Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. That's our goal. Let's have the worship team come up.